We introduce Dr. Kelly for the last time for this series, but we hope to see him back again here at our church. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Paula. Oh my. Anyway, thank you so much. That's awful kind of you. Yeah, we're gonna miss the group here. That's for sure. We've really enjoyed being with you and getting to know the church and the attendees. So yeah, tonight we're talking about practicing forgiveness. And you know, it's an interesting thing. Most often, people seem to relate somehow forgiveness or talking about forgiveness with religion. And certainly forgiveness, I think, is a part of all or most religion. But I want to talk to you about it for a little bit from just a medical or scientific standpoint. Did you know there's a science behind this business of practicing forgiveness? Let's start off by just take a few minutes and ask ourselves, what is forgiveness? And then we'll talk just a little bit about practicing forgiveness. So forgiveness, I'm going to postulate to you, is a process, a mental process that has to do with letting go of things that have that are causing us duress. Oftentimes, it can be where someone has done us wrong, injured us. They truly did treat us wrong, and maybe even injured us or cost us money or whatever it might be. In other words, we suffered negative consequences because of somebody else's action, and we've not been able to let that go. Decide, you know, it's done, it's past, and move on, as they say oftentimes. Another kind, though, of forgiveness that's in some ways even more difficult is when we look at ourselves and we come to the conclusion that we are either faulty, inadequate. In other words, it's negative self-talk is often a major problem, and forgiveness of oneself is, I find, oftentimes an important part of moving past that. I know in my own life that I've done things that even, and I'm now in my 70s, these things were mostly, thank God, done in my teens and 20s, but even some since then, that just curled my ears to think about. I mean, I really would not, I would be embarrassed myself to have to talk about it. It was unreasonable, it was foolish, it was harmful, all those kind of things. And but I learned, thank God, that negative self-talk is actually, there's no benefit to it. It doesn't help one bit. Now, positive self-talk can have benefit, but as all the science that I'm able to find, there's not one redeeming feature to negative self-talk. And so you can safely follow, like they're going to talk about here tonight, the experts are going to talk to us about forgiveness and practicing forgiveness. And then I'm going to chat with you a little bit afterwards, and I want to dialogue about some of the principles that are brought out.
Last year, we admitted a very heavy lady in her 30s to a CHIP program. It was her second time around with us. The previous time, she had done remarkably well, losing in due time half of her excess weight. But as she approached a certain weight number, she felt scared and she started piling her excess weight on again. As she was readmitted, we wondered, would she succeed this time to go beyond that point where something was sabotaging her, holding her back to moving closer to her ideal weight? When in due time her weight had come down and she was now facing that fearful weight number again, This time, an understanding counselor was there to help her gain insight into her fears. You see, she had been abused and traumatized years ago as a teenager, and being very heavy made her feel safe and protected from any possible advances. Her memories of this adverse childhood event had held her prisoner all these years. It was only after having the strength to forgive her perpetrator that she realized that it was forgiveness that set her free after so many years to truly begin to live again. Freed of these fears, she was now able to successfully move toward her desirable weight and keep it there. Forgive to live. Very few psychologists have a more distinguished track record in this area of behavioral and spiritual health than Dr. Dick Tibbetts from Florida. Working in this field for over 30 years, he has used his training to assist tens of thousands of people to achieve whole person health by designing life strategies that work in both the corporate world and in private life. His pioneering forgiveness research as an integral and essential part of health and healing has found its culmination in his book, Forgive to Live, and in his seminars and speaking appointments that have taken him to the Harvard Medical School, the Mayo Clinic, and around the world. It's a great delight for me to present Dr. Dick Tibbetts, the Chief People Officer of Florida Hospital, where he oversees some 16,000 employees. His topic is the gift of forgiveness. Here is Dr. Tibbetts.
Hello, my name is Dick Tibbetts, and I'm the author of the book, Forgive to Live. I want to share with you a study that I did right here at Florida Hospital, in which I worked with patients who had diagnosed stage 1 hypertension, or commonly called high blood pressure. We taught these patients how to forgive as a way of reversing their blood pressure so that they could live a normal life. Interesting. Most people don't see themselves as having elevated anger. I mean, they might know someone that's angry, but they're not angry themselves. What I discovered is that anger is not always expressed as rage, but it is often experienced as hurt, disappointment, or betrayal. And these are experiences that we all must learn to deal with. Anger affects our cardiovascular system in so many different ways. When we're angry, our body releases into the bloodstream a hormone called cortisol, which increases your heart rate. This in turn increases your blood pressure, which together causes tremendous pressure on the tiny little capillaries, which can tear and scar. To fuel all of this, your body releases fat, which, if not burned, converts into cholesterol. That cholesterol then accumulates into these small crevices, compounding the problem. For now, you're not only at risk for high blood pressure, but if one of these accumulated blocks break off, it can go into the brain and cause a stroke. Yes, chronic anger is dangerous to your health. But enough of the science. Let me just share with you my own personal experience the other day when my wife and I went to Busch Gardens. My wife is a calm person, enjoys watching the animals. And I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I enjoy the roller coaster. So after watching the animals all morning long, I convinced my wife that she needed to go on one roller coaster ride. Now remember, my wife had never been on a roller coaster. So I've got to decide which coaster to pick for her to ride on. Now what should I do? Should I pick the gentle coaster to get her used to a ride? Or, given that this is my only ride for the day, should I go for the biggest, baddest coaster in the park? Well, loving husband that I am, I chose the biggest, baddest coaster in the park. And so we stopped and stood in line, and there was a big sign over the coaster that said, 45-minute wait from here. And so we were simply standing for the next 45 minutes, and I happened to turn and look at my wife, and I was shocked. I felt her heart rate, and her heart was rapidly beating. I'm sure her blood pressure was up because I could see the veins sticking out of her neck. In fact, if I would have taken my wife to the emergency room at that time, they would have admitted her for an impending heart attack. And yet, what was happening? We were standing on the ground just like we had been all morning. The difference is what my wife was thinking about. She, in her mind, was already on that coaster, and her body was reacting to those thoughts. This is what we call mind-body medicine. And so if my mind is rehearsing stories of hurt and pain, my body's reacting as if that's occurring every day. And the best way to deal with life's disappointments is by practicing forgiveness. Okay, you say, I know I should forgive, but I don't want to forgive. I mean, why should I forgive? I didn't do anything wrong. The other person is the one who did something bad to me. Why should I let them off the hook? You know, most people, before they're willing to forgive, expect that the other person will apologize or make some kind of restitution, that they'll care about me. The problem is, the other person has gone on with their life. They don't care. They might not even know that I'm hurting. And so I'm left suffering all alone. Why should I forgive that person? Why would I let them off the hook? Well, here's the truth. When I don't forgive, I am the one left suffering. I am the one in pain and misery. For you see, when you don't forgive and you think about that person who's hurt you, it's like handcuffing yourself to them and then spending the whole day with them. So let me ask you, why would you spend the whole day with someone you didn't like? No wonder when you come home at the end of the day and your friend asks you, did you have a bad day? And you said it was a terrible day. It was bad because of the person you spent it with. Think about it. The very person that you don't like is the person that you hope will care enough about you to make your life better. So let me ask you, how is that strategy working for you? You see, it's not anger that's the problem. Things are going to upset us, and in normal situations, we think about it, we deal with it, and we move on. But every once in a while, something happens to us that we don't know how to deal with, and we can't move on. And when we don't move on, we retain those thoughts, and consequently, every time we repeat those thoughts in our mind, our bodies react to that reality. You see, contrary to what you might think, we don't store anger. There's no pouch inside of you that's full of anger. What we store is memories. And every time we recall that painful event, those feelings come rushing upon us just as they did the first time. The more you think about that hurtful event, the more frequently your body's anger is elevated and all the harm that causes to your body. Have you ever talked to someone and they shared with you a story and you could tell that they were upset and that something very painful happened to them? And so you want to help them, and as you explore the story a little more, they inform you that this is something that happened 20 years ago. But because they're thinking about it, it's as if it happened to them just this very day. Forgiveness is a way of letting go rather than hanging on. Learn to put your past in the past where it belongs, and forgiveness will get you there. You see, I know firsthand the pain of being disappointed by someone else. I'll never forget that day I went to work. It was a job I enjoyed. In fact, I gave that job 110% of my energy. And the organization announced that they were going to be doing re-engineering. Now that's nothing but a fancy word for cutting jobs. And when my boss called me into his office, he informed me that my job was being eliminated that very day. Well, you can imagine the devastation as I had to go home and tell my wife and my daughter that I was no longer employed. I was devastated. I felt betrayed. These are people that I enjoyed working with, and they could just tell me that I have no more job. And so that evening, as I shared that story and my wife and daughter shared in my pain, the next day, my wife kind of assumed that I'd go out and start looking for work. But I didn't. I retained that hurt day after day, week after week, and yes, month after month. My blood pressure remained elevated. My doctor was cautioning me that we needed to start me on some kind of treatment to get that managed and under control. When I discovered that my problems, both emotionally and physically, were the result of my inability to deal with the hurt and betrayal. And so I learned that you simply cannot take a poison pill and hope the other person dies. I had to do something for me, and what I needed to do was to practice forgiveness. For you see, you can complain and blame about how terrible life is around you, or you can forgive and live. It's your choice. In the next section, I'm going to teach you the practical steps of how to forgive so that you can begin practicing forgiveness in your life, so that you can move beyond those painful experiences and find true healing, not only emotionally, but physically. I want to teach you to forgive and live. I'd like to invite you on a journey that will transform your life, a journey that begins by practicing forgiveness. You see, life is defined by the choices you make, not by the circumstances that you are dealt. We have all heard inspiring stories of people whose life was in a terrible situation, but they rose above it. Conversely, there are many people that have every advantage in life, and yet their life is being lived out of depression and despair. What makes the difference? It's choice, not chance, that determines your destiny. You see, every time that you have been hurt, you have a choice to make, to forgive or not to forgive. Let me express that as Shakespeare might have expressed it. To forgive or not to forgive, that is the question. And that is the question we must ask ourselves every time we have been hurt. If you forgive, you have the opportunity to heal and move on. But if you do not forgive, you will live your life repeating over and over again the story of hurt, disappointment, and betrayal that you experienced that original time. So how do you stop replaying these old tapes of defeat? Did you know that feelings have a faster pathway to the brain than do thoughts? In psychology, this is called stimulus response. Something happens and I respond. But did you know that not all people respond to the same stimulus in the same way? For example, if I were to throw a snake in the middle of the room, most people would jump back in fear. But there are people who would actually reach forward to pick up the snake to see what kind it was. And so we need to be aware of our responses. To do that, I'd like to invite you to do an experiment with me. I'd like you to clasp your hands together and look and see which thumb is on the top. About half of you will have the left thumb on top and the other half will have the right. But I'll bet none of you thought, which thumb will I put on top when you put your hands together? You see, that's what's called an unconscious choice. We do it every day. And the purpose of forgiveness is to get our response conscious rather than unconscious. So between stimulus and response, we can add another R for reflection, or as some might prefer to call it, prayer. It's when I pause and choose my response. In fact, Viktor Frankl said it this way: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, I have the freedom to choose my response. With forgiveness, your life is no longer defined by your past, but rather by the choices you make today. So forgiveness begins by choosing to forgive. But what's next? You see, most people define forgiveness as forgive and forget. The problem is that when something very traumatic happens to me, even if I try to forgive, I don't forget. And so this definition doesn't work. I like to say forgiveness is not forgetting. Rather, forgiveness is remembering in a different way. Carl Jung put it this way: it all depends on how we look at things, not how things are in and of themselves. I want you to think of it this way. If you were to go to a craft store and see the frames on the wall that you can use to frame your picture, the purpose of a frame is to help focus our attention to what lies inside that frame. And so we can take a picture and crop it all the way down to a headshot, or open it up so that we can see the background and other people. We call this your frame of reference. When you frame things, you choose which facts to place in your picture. And conversely, you choose what facts to leave out of your picture. And so our picture is really a composition of those things we choose to put in. Think of it this way. When someone hurts me, what do I focus on? All the bad things that person has ever done. When someone is my friend, what do I focus on? All the good things. I can illustrate this one evening when my daughter brought home her first date. I'll never forget that night. She was so proud of this young gentleman, and yet I recognized this person, and he was not someone that I was particularly excited about my daughter dating. And so when he left, my daughter proceeded to tell me all the good things about him. I believe that's where we get the expression, love is blind, from. But can I share with you another truth? Anger is equally as blind. And so, how we see someone determines upon which attributes we focus on. For everybody is a mixture of good and bad. One person's best friend can be another person's worst enemy. Why? Because of the attributes of that person you choose to focus on. And so in reality, we do frame our point of view, and it does become the way we see life. But the good news about forgiveness is as I see the world from a bigger point of view, as I bring the good into the picture, as I look upon my strengths and not just what the other person did, as I bring into my picture the learnings from this situation so that I can be a better person, my picture changes. My frame of reference changes. And so forgiveness not only has the power to change my past, but it can also affect my future. Because when I see life differently, I move through life differently. I now do things that I wouldn't do before. I now get out and engage people instead of staying in my room discouraged and depressed. Forgiveness allows you to move from victim to victor. It allows you to become what you were meant to be, rather than being stuck in the past that someone else created for you. Forgiveness is the one thing that changes everything. I want to illustrate this point in this true story. Two former POWs who were imprisoned together in Vietnam during that crisis now assemble at the Vietnam Memorial 20 years later. If you've never been to that memorial, it's a black marble structure, and engraved on it is the names of every person who lost their life in that event. Often people go with sheets of paper and color in the name to take back as a memory. Well, these two gentlemen's memory was of being encaged in a prison. The prime of their life was taken away from them. And here they stand together for the first time. One soldier looks at his friend and asks this question: "Have you forgiven your captors yet?" With that, the other soldier turned around and looked at his friend and said, "No, I will never forgive them for what they did to me." His friend then turned and said these words: "Then I guess they still have you captive, don't they?" You see, when we fail to forgive, we are the ones that are held in prison. And the irony is, we are the only ones that can set ourselves free. How do you escape from the prison of your own resentment and bitterness? The answer is straightforward and simple. You forgive. And so I invite you this day to make the choice to forgive, to reframe the story that has held you captive all these years, and to experience the blessing of forgiveness.
So, what do you think about that topic?
Very timely,
Very timely.
very genuine and down to earth and simple.
Yes.
But getting there can be difficult.
Yes, that's true. And I agree. She said that it was very timely, very gentle, but getting there can be very difficult. And so one of the things before I say, let me just ask, I'd be happy to have a couple of you at least, tell us something that was said or some illustration or some piece of this that really stuck in your mind, really impresses you, something that you're probably not going to forget, or you might even share with somebody else. Yeah, John in the back.
So what struck me was the concept of reframing the event or whatever happened. And I think that's an interesting concept. And I think the question just to some extent is, how do you do that without lying to yourself, I guess, to some extent?
Yeah, so talking about reframing, and it's an interesting concept, and how do you do that without lying to yourself? Let me just clarify or remind ourselves about reframing. So reframing is where I take something, an experience I've had, and I have been looking at it in one particular way, and I look at it from another perspective. And in particular, I don't know about everyone else, but for me, it's actually taking a look and saying, okay, what good can I see there? There's some good in practically everything they say, right? So I look for the positives. We've all had some serious negative things happen in our life, disappointments, tragedies, whatever. And I think the answer there is that we're not going to lie to ourselves, but it has to be genuine, right? I'm sure, John, you would agree with me on this, that the reframing has to be real. It can't be fake or make believe or act like it didn't happen. To me, that's the most ridiculous idea. You can't act like it didn't happen, and that actually doesn't really fix it. It just stuffs it. So what you really want to do is acknowledge that it happened, but there's positives. I don't want to get, I don't want to get too personal. And everybody has their own experience. Who else? Does someone else have another thing that, oh, Barbara's got, okay, Barbara?
Yeah, I think he mentioned, Dr. Fix mentioned the idea of broadening your base of thought or how you perception, broadening your base of perception. You know, and anger or hurt, at least for me, leads me to a place of trying to control the situation, smalling down my vision. And if I can just take some breaths that you taught us yesterday and just breathe deeply into that and then allow it and not be afraid, you know, because fear enters into that for me. But that whole broadening of the vision, reframing, like John said, like you said, and just looking at it from a different position. And he kind of alluded to that, and that's been very helpful.
Yes, yes, thank you. That's so true. And broadening is a nice way to look at it, because that, in reality, I think reframing is broadening, is take a broader, and because, I mean, I thought the little illustration about the two prisoners of war that were at the memorial was a really good one. I mean, so they've still got you captive. And the other statement he made that in the previous segment was he's learned that you can't take a poison pill and expect it to kill somebody else, you know, or injure someone else. So, yeah, broader perspective and looking for a positive. It's there. Anybody want to share an experience to illustrate that? No?
Oh, this is just such,
Oh, you can share something else if it's whatever you.
this is such an old memory. I was 16, I think, when it happened. I'm 71, almost 72 now. And I had my first date that was set up by my mother and a coworker. And I went to a dance with this young gentleman. It was all awkward as could be. And I made the decision to go in the garage door when we parted, so we didn't go in the front door. And when I walked into the living room, I had a total of 5 brothers, and 3 were older, and they were all in the living room with their friend, 1 friend each. I don't know if they planned it that way. I don't know if it's really 1 friend each. And my oldest brother, who had my first memory of him was at 5 years old, stomping my foot and saying, "I will never talk to you again," or something like that. And he had just for fun, had a shotgun somewhere available. And I was just so humiliated, angry, mortified, and I haven't really shared, I've never shared that in a place like this. But it's like, let go of it, Mary. I mean, just the whole anger piece and the humiliation. And I was the only girl with 5 boys and all that, blah, blah, blah. And I'd like to forget. I'd like to just look at them at the age they were, look at me at the age I was. And I guess my parents were sound asleep. That's what my one brother said. Well, they were probably asleep. I thought, great. But broaden that perspective that they were just being teenage boys that were going to get her, this will be good. And anyway, that's stayed in me as as you were talking, or the thing was going, I heard victim in my head. I felt victimized by that whole setup. And there's so many more horrible ways to be victimized, but I need to let go of that. I mean, I want to let go of that. I mean, half of them are dead. I'm not dead yet, so I just want to not have them
living, living in that secret category of abuses
Yeah.
in my life that, let it go. And how many people have abuses hidden in their lives that I've done to them,
Yeah.
hurt them in some way. So
Sure.
anyway, I wasn't thought about talking about it, and I thought, no, I don't think I'll talk about it. That might not fit the topic, and they'll think I'm just this weird person.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable. And to me, there's a number of thoughts that come to mind, but one is, I have 2 children, and many of you in the audience have children, more than that. And one thing I noticed is that they are so different. I'm thinking about when they were little and they were sitting in the chair, high chair, thank you. High chair. It's been a long time, hasn't it? I can't remember. But anyway, I had the same kind of thing happen at different times to each one of them. And they were sitting in the high chair and eating, and they knocked over their milk glass. And the milk spills on this thing. Unfortunately, it has this little dam around it, right? So but still, some went over and a wave went over and on the floor. And so one of them, when that happened, their face just all crinkled up and they started crying. Ah! And you're like, oh my goodness, this is not a problem. This is just, and the other one's like, pushed some of that milk out of the way and kept eating. and it's just so remarkable how different we are. And one of the things that I have really liked learning, I'm still learning it, as my wife can easily attest, you'll see here in a minute, is but learning to appreciate people with a different take than I have. And so like the one child that, just sort of pushed the milk out of the way from the cookie or whatever and kept eating wouldn't get it. What's the big deal? What are you crying about? And then of course we've got that saying, crying over spilt milk, and I couldn't help but think about that later. But anyway, so my point is that we're different, and it's okay to be like we are. It's every one of us is unique in some ways, and we've got to be comfortable that we're okay, and everybody's not just like me. Anyway, so I really appreciate what y'all have shared, because we've got a number of things here. Having a broader scope helps to reframe. Having this awareness that what we're letting eat at us is hurting us, not whoever did something or created the thing. It's not really, like they said in the video, may not even be aware, or the person could even be dead, but we're still suffering from it. So I hope that we can use some of the techniques that we're talking about to move on past them. I see that Barbara's got the mic. Let's see what she wants to share.
So Mary had mentioned victim, and victimhood to me, and I watched this with the man I was married to for a long time. He spent 3 tours in Vietnam, and he was a lovely guy, actually. There are reasons why we're no longer married, but he was really great to everybody, very generous, kind of talked about it somewhat. But one of the things that happened after we were divorced and we were together and talking to some people, and he related one of the incidences that he had had in Vietnam that I had never heard of in 17 years. So one of the things that the doctor talked about was how we don't forgive ourselves. And I think a lot of the people that were in Vietnam carry that with them, or even any military people. They carry with them a whole different way of life, and things that they could not deal with, would not be able to deal with in the life that the rest of us live. So can you address that whole thought about victimization and how we victimize ourselves and hold ourselves in that way a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great, you've brought up a great number of points actually in a way, and I will speak to it. I don't know if will be covering exactly what you had in mind, Barbara, but first I want to just say that I know that the trauma associated with killing people is beyond, after 70 some years, I'm convinced that it's pretty much beyond complete description. If you've been in a military action and you know that you have, as part of your mission, part of doing what you were commanded to do, you've killed people or tried to kill people or maimed people. I'm fortunate. I haven't had that experience. So I don't know what it's like personally, but I've talked to a number of vets and other individuals and even some of my own relatives. And it's things that in general, they don't talk about because there's nothing pleasant or good about it. The ones that I think deal with it appropriately realize that don't deny it, but as we've said, look at a broad picture and move on. But as far as the thing about victimization, especially us being a victim, I was thinking about the experience that Mary shared, and I was thinking how an injury that is physical, like if somebody, hurts you physically or even, shoots you somewhere in your body or it ends up in some kind of a physical injury, in some ways it's not as bad as the emotional injury that we suffer, even if it's not from a physical. In other words, so a person some of the things I remember most vividly in my life are where I was completely humiliated. I just felt so exposed, so I don't know what word would be better than humiliated. What's another good word? Anyway, it's a very strong injury, emotional injury for many of us. I think probably for most of us, if we've truly been humiliated, it's humiliating. And so how do you move on? Because it's so easy to see yourself as the victim. But I know one of the biggest things that I have worked with people that I work with people, even though I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but in doing lifestyle medicine, as was brought out in the very beginning of the video tonight by Dr. Deal, there are people whose health issues are very much tied to emotional issues and feeling victims. And when you, it's like they talk about these athletes that have, they're professional, excellent, fantastic athletes, and they are having a good streak, as they call it, a winning streak, and then they realize, oh my goodness, I'm about to set a world record. I mean, who can do this? And they actually, they sabotage their own performance because it's like, who can do this? And so if we see ourselves as a victim, we are actually curtailing, sabotaging ourselves. And we need to broaden our scope, realize that I'm not a victim because I was victimized. You catch that? I'm not a victim because I was victimized. And if we can get our head around that, we can move on. We cannot change the fact of what happened to us, but as he said so many ways in this video, we can change how we view it, how we frame it, how we relate to it. Anyway, thank you for your feedback and your input and your. It's time now for us to end the health talk and to talk about our taste samples. So are you going to share with us, Paula? Come on up. And every night I made sure I had tasted some of the taste samples so I see what all the others are getting, and it's been quite enjoyable.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. So tonight, haven't tasted it tonight, but I've tasted this before. So my co-partner, the other health ministry director, Kim Casey, made our sample tonight, and it is an egg salad. It's a vegan egg salad in that it's made of tofu. And I'm just going to tell you, it's really good. And even if you think you don't like tofu, you just need to sample it, because I was really hoping that's what she would make, but I didn't want to, be too bossy, and I didn't tell her that's what to make, but that's what she made. Plus she's got some strawberries back there, and it's really good. So I think you're going to like that. And I guess that's all I wanted to say. This, I thought, was a really good talk. Thank you for sharing. And I think
Yes,
others
yes.
there was more things that I think could be shared. So I think it is a good thing to think about. And for us, maybe you go home, maybe there's family or friends that you want to open up to. So thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah.
much. I liked it.
Yeah,
Can I
good. Please.
say a quick prayer for our food? So dear Heavenly Father, thank you for Kim and for preparing our food sample we have tonight. We just ask that you bless it. I just ask that everybody gives it a taste and see how they like it. Please help us all to take time and process these things as we learn tonight. As we get this stimulus, take a moment for reflection. Maybe we need to say a prayer, talk to you, and then respond. So thank you for these lectures. Thank you that we got here safely. And I just pray we all get home safely tonight. And please be with Dr. Kelly and Sally as they travel tomorrow, and give them travel mercy. We pray all this through your son, Jesus. Amen.